good people of YouTube? Mountbatten here. And today we are discussing are secondary builds worth it in this year, 2022, in the current iteration of World of Warships. Now, this question really depends upon a couple of things. First off, on what ship are you talking about? Because that has changed a lot since, of course, things like the commander rework and certain other mechanics being changed in the game. Back in the day, like way back in the day, you could reasonably build into the secondaries on most ships, and you could get the secondaries out to a decent range, and they would have a decent level of accuracy. And it really came down to, well, the secondaries on the ship themselves. What did they perform like? What armor could they pin? How many of them were there? And that was really the limiting factor. So potentially on ships that either had enough secondaries or a large caliber of secondaries. So for example, the American battleships on the Iowa and the Montana and even the North Carolina, there's a decent bit of secondaries on those ships, and they had a decent fire rate. Of course, this is pre-Massachusetts and pre-Ohio and pre-Georgia with their improved fire rate. And they could do reasonably well. I'm not saying they were the best ships ever for secondaries, but they could certainly work to a degree where they were usable. I mean, if you run into some players from back then, they swear up and down by their secondary Montanas. I've met quite a few of them. And of course, again, with ships with larger caliber secondaries, they could also work quite well. Again, thanks to the ability to build into them, and you could improve the accuracy by a pretty good amount with the commander skills. Back then, of course, the old manual fire for secondary skill gave you that 60% bonus from, what was it, tier 6 on up or tier 7 or up, I can't remember exactly. And that was just a flat bonus. There was no spool up time or anything. But again, that did, of course, cause the secondaries on the other half of your ship to not fire. But generally, the improved accuracy you got from the half of your ship that is firing at the target was very focused, very concentrated, and would work quite well. And you could reasonably build into several nations back then in terms of their secondaries. So you could build into the secondaries on the French battleships, especially from the Alsace and the Republic. The Republic, for a while, had the longest secondary range in game, and it was pretty decent when the secondaries were in action. Same with the Alsace, but the problem with that is that the secondary mounts on the Alsace and on the Republic weren't very well armored, or on any of the French battleships for that matter. So while they would work quite well when they were intact, when they were destroyed, even if you built into their survivability with taking the first secondary module, was it the secondary armaments mod 1 or whatever, auxiliary armaments mod 1, that would increase the survivability of your AA and your secondaries, even if you did that, they would of course get blapped, and then there you go. But when they worked quite well. There was a lot of them, good range, and again, good accuracy with the build. So fast forward to today, and now there are a lot of ships that I would say, yeah, you could build into the secondaries on that, and they would work quite well, that I don't say that for anymore, like the Shikishima. That's a prime example of that. The Shikishima has Harugumo turrets going up and down her sides. With the Harugumo turrets, with their crazy velocity, they can pin 30 millimeters of armor. More than enough to deal with a lot of cruisers and, of course, destroyers at tier 10. Not enough to deal with battleships, but certainly enough to deal with the pests that you might want to deal with a secondary build. Of course, cruisers and destroyers, ships that you would probably overpin with your main battery guns, or ships that you couldn't really keep up with your main battery guns turrets, that you would want those secondary turrets to take care of. And I wouldn't say build into the secondaries on the Shikishima anymore. Why? Well, because the downsides of the secondary build now with the new commander skills isn't really worth it, because you have to take that 45-second time for your secondaries to spool up. So that takes away a lot of their ability to deal with destroyer and cruiser threats that would pop up next to you. Most destroyer captains aren't going to sit within your secondary range for 45 seconds while your secondary guns spool up. Especially, again, when they're dealing with turrets like the like the Hiroshima turrets, with the great shells for dealing with DDs. Most of them are just going to either pop smoke or run away from you. The second part being that with the meta, unless you've got a really freaking good secondary ship, you aren't really going to be able to use your secondaries much at all. Now, the match watching the background, it's a fantastic match. And I kicked myself so hard for not taking Lucians on my Schlieffen in this match. I've stopped respecing Lucians because I use Lucians for, God, almost everything in the German nation. And for like GK, Prussia, and Bismarck, Tirpitz, so forth and so on, they don't take IFHE, but in the German battle cruisers, you do take IFHE, so I just put another 21-point German commander on there, and I didn't get the secondary armament expert skill pop that you would with Lucians, which would have made this round much, much crazier, but this is a good round. It's a fantastic round. It was a tremendously fun round, too. However, I had been playing all day up until this point, getting terrible games. If you guys watched, I think it was the Tier 11 video I put out earlier this week talking about super ships coming to the tech tree. In that video, I stated that I'd had absolutely terrible matches. And I just cobbled together, I think it was 2 or 3 replays that I had from throughout the day for the background footage of that video. Then I finally had this match. This is one match after playing for 3 to 4 hours of matches that the team sat in the back. The matches were incredibly one-sided. No one wanted to push in, and nothing really happened to the last few minutes of the game. You can see me, I'm not exactly sure where we started in this match, but for the first part of this match, you should be able to see me just take up a very defensive position. I don't push in very early on, and I really push in quite late. I push in when I think that we have the match in the bag, and we're like 2 ships down and they're 4 ships down. I'm like, okay, we got this now. I can afford to be a little loose and fast here with my ship. And then that's when I decided to push in, and what you see happen. It just turned out to be quite a fun time. This rarely happens anymore. And with the way the commander skills are now, unless you have a ship like a Schlieffen, a GK, or a Prussia, which I wouldn't even recommend you build into the secondaries on a Prussia, ships with built-in secondary characteristics like the improved accuracy that the Germans get, of course the ability to pin 32 millimeters of armor that the Germans mainline gets as well, or an absolute goofy amount of guns like the Schlieffen gets, and when you take IFHE you can pin 32 millimeters of armor. Unless you have a ship that is basically essentially designed to be a secondary ship in today's World of Warships, it's not really worth building into anymore. And even then, when you have a ship with good secondaries, it may not be worth building into it either. If you guys watched my Scharnhorst video from a few weeks ago, I took my secondary build off of my Scharnhorst. And Scharnhorst got a pretty nice buff with the commander rework, where you get the secondaries out to 9 kilometers now, which is quite good by Tier 7 standards. I still have a secondary build on my Gneisenau now because she does have the 128s that can pin the 32 millimeters of armor, which is more than enough at Tier 7 and can even keep up at Tier 9 when the Gneisenau gets up tiered to Tier 9 as it does. But the current meta in the game is so stale, so stagnant, so snipery for a majority of the match that a main battery accuracy build would be more viable on most ships that could do a secondary build in today's World of Warships. So again, like the Scharnhorst and the Prussia, I have main battery tank builds on those, and I'm doing quite well in those ships now with those builds. Now, I don't take great joy in that happening because I did like secondary builds on those ships beforehand, like Prussia in Dirigible Derby, when you could really, get in there, get it in knife fighting range and go to town. It was great. It was fantastic. I had a blast in that ship in Dirigible Derby running a secondary build on it. Scharnhorst, of course. I ran secondary build on Scharnhorst for years. I just recently changed it because it's too frustrating to playing a ship like Scharnhorst with small caliber guns that aren't that accurate, and secondaries that you don't really get to use most of the time. So you got this massive point investment in this build that you're not really going to be able to make use of. So it'd be better used building into your main battery guns and into the tankiness of the ship. And the Scharnhorst is a fantastically tanky ship, as is the Prussia when it's in the correct situation. And this has been a side effect of the direction that Wargaming has been going with the game. You've been having less choices on how you can build individual ships and how effective those builds are on said ships. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still quite a few ships that you can put a variety of builds on, and they'll still work quite well. But they've been slowly removing hulls that you could research, and they would drastically change the characteristics of the ship. And they've, in many cases, taken away, let's say there was an A, B, and C hull on a ship. Well, they've taken away the B hull now, and now we get a new premium ship with slightly tweaked characteristics, like West Virginia was 41, 42, 40, whatever. West Virginia, which is the A hull Colorado. That's what Colorado used to be back in the days, but they took her, dropped it down a tier, new premium ship that they can sell for cash. And that's why I said when they removed the B hull for the Iowa, or was it the A hull? I can't remember. Whatever hull they removed for the Iowa, I'm like, oh, well, we're probably going to get New Jersey, Wisconsin now as a premium since they removed that ship's hull. So that's unfortunately where we're at in the game right now. I don't really think they're worth it on ships that you could have ran them on back in the day. Unless, again, you got something like a Schlieffen or a GK or a Bismarck or a Tirpitz. And even on Bismarck and Tirpitz, well, I'd say on Tirpitz it's still worth it because of the torpedoes. You have a lot of utility there when you get in close. But even on Bismarck, running a main battery build on Bismarck in today's World of Warships, especially a ship that's in Tier 8, that's going to be seeing a lot of Tier 10 games, and the Tier 10 meta is completely stagnant right now for most matches, it might be worth it to run a main battery build on. There's something I was asked about on stream. On stream, I originally said, no, I wouldn't, take a secondary build off of Bismarck, but after I sat back after stream and thought about it, I thought, well, maybe you should. 25-second reload, 8 15-inch guns, put the dispersion module on there. Now, I don't think it's going to make it laser accurate, but it'll make it quite a bit more accurate. Then go with a tank build, get your concealment down, fire prevention, and all that. Probably be a pretty rock-solid ship. Might even be in a video next week. But yeah, it's sad that this is the direction the game's going in terms of the meta. And like I said in the Super Ships video, I don't think the introduction of Super Ships is going to make it any better. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But with that and these support CVs they're working on, granted in just a conceptual test right now, I don't see the meta changing anytime soon. But that's my 2 cents on the subject. Just thought it'd be an interesting subject to look at, especially after having this game I had in the Schlieffen, which was a great game, and I really did love this match. And this is one of the reasons I do keep playing, too, because when these matches happen, it kind of almost make the last 2 hours of pain worth it. But it was a great match, had a blast, and it was a defeat, but hey, had a lot of fun in the process, and this is the video game. It's supposed to be fun. Guys, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 35,000 subs, just past 34,100 yesterday, and I can't thank you guys enough for that. Hope you'll have a wonderful Saturday and a wonderful weekend. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.